in this age of Instagram, it's very easy to see a beautiful picture and want to be transported to that beautiful place. But potentially, if that image exists, it's because it may already be a site that is possibly on a tipping point in terms of visitor numbers.
If you're as cynical as me, it's easy to view a company's social impact endeavours as an exercise in PR. A small donation here, a Facebook post there. It's now almost standard business practice to make the right noises on the right topics and reap the positive press. But that view disregards the companies making real and consistent steps to improve the lives of some of those most in need. Companies where social impact isn't tacked on as an afterthought, but baked into the very DNA of the way they operate. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, travel firms, especially those focused on lesser visited or economically disadvantaged parts of the world, are well represented in the latter group. But what are the difficulties of reconciling commercial demands with a social conscience? How do companies ensure the funds and assistance get through to those who really need them? And how can you ensure your spending is maximised to make a difference? My name's Jack, and you're listening to Battleface Uncharted, a podcast brought to you by Battleface Travel Insurance. We speak to some of the travel industry's leading figures to discover the trends that you need to know about. Being immersed in the world of travel means here at Battleface we're well aware of the economic disparities that can exist between the places we call home and the places we visit. As is today's guest, Clare Doolan, Head of Travel at the social enterprise Ishkar. Ishkar was founded in 2016 as a way of creating access to a global marketplace for artisans impacted by barriers to trade. Focusing first on Afghanistan, its scope has grown to incorporate producers in countries such as Mali, Lebanon, Pakistan, Myanmar, DR Congo, Yemen and beyond. As well as the retail side of the business, Ishkar also offers small group tours to some of these destinations, where travellers can immerse themselves in the communities that produce these objects, guided by experts including conservationists and photojournalists. Clare, I know from our email exchange that you've just come back from Socotra, which has long been on my travel bucket list. Is it as amazing as it looks?
Yeah, and I'd say, and then some actually, just because the pictures don't do justice to the history and the heritage of the island. So yeah, for sure, you need to get out.
You're obviously head of travel at Ishkar. What do you want your travellers to take away from a trip?
I mean, it's a good question, actually, because I think given some of the countries that we organize travel to, there could be a tendency, I guess, to attract people who are sort of going there to reaffirm a stereotype of that place, because we've worked in countries that have maybe had a history of being misrepresented in the media or conflict. And so for us, it's important that people who travel with us are open-minded and looking to learn about the world through travel, because there's no better way to do that than through a first-hand experience, and to learn something new about the destinations we go to. And the way that we do travel, we're always looking to partner with people who can represent that country from their own perspective as someone from that place, and hopefully use that as a strong context to kind of provide for travelers to have conversations while we're traveling and to basically learn something new that they wouldn't be getting if they were to open a newspaper.
So these are the travel guides that you employ, which I think on your website says are sometimes, from the world of conservation or photojournalism. How do you select guides to make Ishkar's trips unique?
Well, the first thing is to have, I guess, a unique or a different perspective on the destination to maybe what's readily available on the internet or through like a glossy travel magazine. So when we've worked with photojournalists in different destinations in the past, what's been important is that they have a long-standing first-hand perspective of that place, and also even though many of them may be foreigners who've spent some time based in that country, that they themselves will have, their own network or their own community within that destination that working with them in turn gives us access to, because it's equally important. We don't just want to have a foreign perspective on a destination. If we're working then with maybe fixers they've worked with, or conservationists, or historians or whatnot that have sort of become part of their community through their time working in that destination, then travelers really get that benefit of the dialogue between that person and whoever it is that we're linking up with on the road. So in terms of choosing people to work with, what's sort of important, or what is important, is to be able to kind of create a conversation through travel and to have more than one perspective, so that in the process of meeting different people, that travelers learn that there's more than one story to a place, and there's more than one interpretation of where they are, whether that's historical, political, cultural, or whatever it might be. So that really forms the starting point for finding the right people to help us host a trip.
Is there a typical Ishkar traveler? And if so, who are they? What do they look like?
No, in short, and well, actually, yes, as well, to some degree. So what I would say is there's not a typical demographic in terms of, say, age, gender, nationality. Our travelers really do come from everywhere, which is quite incredible to see. We've had people traveling with us from Iran and Ecuador and Kenya and the US and France and, all sorts of parts of the world. And similarly, we've had people traveling with us who are maybe anything from their mid-20s to their early 70s. But there is a commonality between them in the sense that generally people who are out on the road with us are quite well traveled already. They usually have a fair background of being independent travelers, and typically they aren't traveling in groups. Often when they travel with us, it's the first time that they've been on a group trip. And the reason for that is that we're putting together something in order to access a region where, or to experience it in a way that wouldn't be possible were they not with that small group of people. And really what is sort of, or does link our travelers in terms of the sorts of person that they might be, is that they are generally well-traveled, curious, open-minded, and excited to engage with the places that we're taking them to.
How does Ishkar view its social responsibility in the places it visits?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's just so many, and it starts from the people that we choose to work with, certainly. So what's really important is that, firstly, our emphasis in terms of travel is to create travel experiences in places that are often overlooked for tourism purposes. So firstly, it's about creating tourism revenue in a destination that otherwise may not be getting much of it. Also then to make sure that the people we work with in the destination are locally based, that money is going into the communities for the places that we visit, and therefore hopefully creating revenue and economic empowerment, or boosting it where otherwise those opportunities may be more limited as well for the individuals that we work with. It also has to do with our impact on the ground environmentally. So we keep our groups to a maximum of 8 travelers, and that's also because if we're going into a place, we don't want to kind of overwhelm that destination with a whole lot of with big groups. So it's not just the environmental impact, but also the social impact in that sense, particularly if we're encouraging, say, a photographic journey, then we don't want to have a group of, say, 15 foreigners with big lenses all pointed at one vendor in a marketplace. So we want to make sure that we can integrate as much as possible in terms of like getting into the rhythm of the place rather than causing a disruption by our presence there. And then it's also in terms of even, you know, even though some of these places we visit aren't that touristed, like Socotra Island, for example, there is certainly the potential that that will change. And certainly on Socotra, you know, it is more accessible than it was a few years ago. And so it's also about constantly looking for ways to get away from the crowds, to work with different communities and areas that maybe, you know, aren't typically on the tourist route for the few people that do go out there, and to make sure that we sort of disperse the physical footprint as well, and also that we're diversifying sort of who gets that money. So, you know, if most people visiting a place are only visiting, say, 3 or 4 key areas, then it may only be the communities in those specific areas that benefit, as opposed to people in the rest of that place. And Socotra Island's a good example of that. So the more we look to break away from that, the more we can also have a positive impact in terms of income for communities that might not be so much on the well-beaten track for that place.
That's really interesting. I mean, I suppose we're often confronted by, you know, travel companies in this instance that, you know, claim to make a difference to the destinations they visit. You know, how would you advise a traveler to assess the, you know, the veracity of that claim?
Oh, I think it can be challenging to do that actually from the outset, particularly given, you know, how many people will potentially say things on the internet, and then when you turn up, the reality is different. I think the first way to sort of get through that, though, is certainly to have a conversation. We talk to all of our travelers before the trip even departs, and one of the biggest motivations for that is to make sure that we're setting the right expectations in terms of what they can expect from us and the experience on the road. And equally, it's a very good opportunity for us to talk to them about what's important to them, what their priorities are in visiting a place, and whether or not we can meet those needs as well. So certainly having a conversation beforehand, I think, is key. Asking questions, not just about the day-to-day and the itinerary, but, you know, how the travel will take place, in terms of, you know, what areas are being visited, what opportunities there may be for seeing something new or engaging with something different. You know, I think in this age of Instagram, it's very easy to see a beautiful picture and want to be transported to that beautiful place. But potentially, if that image exists, it's because it may already be a site that is possibly on a tipping point in terms of visitor numbers. And so it can be easy to want to, I guess, have a checklist or a bucket list, but I think maybe something that can be just as worthwhile exploring is what places may you be able to engage with that aren't satisfying, I guess, a preset idea of what that place will be like, but what's something that could be totally different or out of the box, or what's an area that people aren't demanding to visit, just in terms of thinking for yourself, like, how can I discover something new that I haven't researched on the internet, as well as potentially taking a little bit of pressure off some of those sites that are more in demand.
Got you. The other side of Ishkar, of course, is the retail element. Can you give us an idea of how Ishkar sources the objects it sells through its store and on the website?
Sure. So the company actually, well, the directors for the company, Edmund and Flore, they actually lived in Kabul in Afghanistan a number of years ago. And it was while they were living and working in Afghanistan that they came to realize that not only did the destination and the country and the people present a different reality to what they'd seen in the press, but there were also these incredibly talented artisans who were based in Afghanistan at that time. I mean, it's since grown beyond that, but talented artisans based in Afghanistan producing really beautiful objects, whether that be something like jewelry or kilims or hand-blown glassware, where the domestic market for those products was dwindling for a number of reasons. First, you know, the economic ability to actually purchase things that are made by a process that really takes time and a craft that takes years to learn. And secondly, the influx of really affordable products from other places, say like China, for example, where it's just easy to buy something off the shelf. And so initially, the process of sourcing products came from just being firsthand exposed to, that destination and that place, and seeing people creating these things, and realizing that there was huge potential for those artisans to, I guess, have a demand to continue to practice their crafts, if they had access to a more global marketplace, and then the potential income that comes with that through selling to a broader market. And so it's also been a process of working with different organizations like, say, Turquoise Mountain, which is an NGO in the UK, which seeks to basically, from anything from restoring historical buildings in places like Afghanistan, where there's a risk that due to the political context in the country, it might be overlooked, to also themselves supporting artisans and that sort of thing. So it's a process of, I guess, building local connections in countries, looking for opportunities to expand to other countries where similarly people might have a barrier to trade, whether that be through conflict or say trade embargoes or whatnot, and basically having those conversations with people to I guess set up a relationship and to find ways to get their products to a more global marketplace. So a lot of those conversations, I think, happen in the communities around Ishkar, and just through building local contacts and speaking to different artisans who then sort of recommend others as well.
Got you. The pandemic obviously put a hold on much of travel for 18 months, 2 years, however long it was. How did Ishkar respond to that challenge, and also ensure it mitigated some of the effects on the communities it helps?
Oh, wow. I mean, really, it was a hugely challenging time. There were a lot of things to consider with respect to, not just the closure of borders, but also the risk potentially to communities in places that we might visit at that time. But similarly, there was also that the huge risk that people who lived in places where governments didn't have things like furlough schemes or grants or unemployment benefits for those out of work, people were really risking their livelihoods in terms of not being able to work, who were used to tourism money in order to support their families and themselves. So we did actually continue to travel through COVID where it was possible in terms of the risk perspective. So of course we had to put measures in place to ensure that people were wearing masks and getting their PCR tests and doing, say, lateral flow tests during travel and that sort of thing as well. But also I think it is a tricky one, because I think with Ishkar, at least, we do also have the production side of the business when it comes to selling physical items. So of course that helps to then get a little bit more of an income into those countries, but it may not necessarily be to the same people who are involved in helping us on the travel side. But yeah, on that side, it was just a case of sort of assessing how best we could continue to travel and continue to generate not just the income, but also the first-hand experiences for people in those destinations, in terms of the travelers, to sort of see that the world is still out there and that their tourism money can still have an impact. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question in the way you're intending.
It does, absolutely. Claire, I admit I very rarely buy mementos from my travels, but on the rare occasion I have, they're generally items that I really cherish. Is there one object you've picked up on your travels that holds a special place in your heart?
Oh, that's such a good question. I really have to think about it. I've tended not to collect too many objects myself over time, because I've been a bit of a nomad, and I've had this sort of fear that whatever I collect on the road is going to end up sitting on a shelf, and at some point I'll need to figure out what to do with it. But more recently, I have actually bought a house. And so the last time I was in Pakistan, actually for Ishkar, hosting a trip with Monsieur Pele, I was in Islamabad and actually just walked into a carpet store and bought a beautiful Persian carpet. So I sort of spent all this time traveling to beautiful places and seeing beautiful things and not feeling like I could pack them up and take them home with me. But I think this giant carpet that I now have sitting in my house is definitely one of the more cherished things that I have.
You've been listening to Battleface Uncharted, brought to you by Battleface Travel Insurance.